Everyone knows Meg Griffin is the punchline of Family Guy. Her own father says it. Her school says it. The internet has agreed for over 25 years. One episode, buried in Season 10, looked at the same girl and reached the opposite conclusion. In this video, we break down every reason Meg is the only good person in Quahog. Section 1. The Girl Nobody Knew How to Write Before Family Guy was a show. It was a 15-minute demo tape sitting on a desk at Fox, and inside that tape there was a teenage girl who already had a problem. She had a name, she had a design, she had a voice, provided at the time by Rachel McFarlane, the sister of the man who created her. What she did not have was a reason to be there. Every other character in that pilot presentation walked in carrying a joke. She walked in carrying nothing. And the story of Meg Griffin, from that tape all the way to the show that airs today, is the story of what happens to a character who is put on screen before anyone in the room has figured out what she is for. Family Guy came from a young animator named Seth MacFarlane. He was in his mid-20s. He had made 2 short films at art school and after, one called The Life of Larry, another called Larry and Steve, both built around a heavy-set dad and a talking dog who acted more like a person than a pet. Fox saw them, liked them, and gave him a small pile of money to build a proper pitch. He went away and came back with a short demo he had made mostly by hand. Fox said yes. They ordered a season, and on January 31st, 1999, the first episode of Family Guy aired right after Super Bowl 33, in front of one of the biggest television audiences a new show can ever get. That first episode was called Death Has a Shadow. Meg is in it. She is in the opening scene. She is in the kitchen. She is at the table. She is standing in the background of the living room. She is there for the whole runtime, and by the time the credits roll, almost nobody watching could have named a single thing about her. Set her beside the rest of the family, and the reason becomes obvious. Peter Griffin is a loud, dumb, impulsive father who will do anything for a laugh and never learns. That is a joke machine. A man who does not think before he acts is worth 100 episodes on his own. Lois Griffin is a patient suburban mother with a rich family she ran away from and a wild past she keeps quiet about. That is a joke machine too, because the gap between what she looks like and what she has done is funny every single time the show opens it. Chris Griffin is an awkward, overweight teenage boy who is slow on the uptake and has an evil monkey living in his closet. Stewie Griffin is a 1-year-old baby with a British accent, a laboratory in his bedroom, and a plan to kill his mother. Brian Griffin is a dog who drinks martinis, votes, dates women, and thinks he is the smartest one in the house. Every one of those characters can be dropped into any story and generate comedy on contact. Then there is Meg. Meg Griffin is a teenage girl who wants people to like her. That is it. That is the whole design. There is no twist, no secret, no contradiction, no engine. Even the way she is drawn says the same thing, and the character sheet makes it plain. Peter is a huge round shape with a chin big enough to park a car on. Stewie has a head shaped like a football. Brian is a white dog standing upright with a red collar. Chris is a wide block of a kid in a plain shirt. Every one of them is designed to be picked out of a lineup from across a room, in the dark, at a glance. Meg is a pink knit hat, a pair of round glasses, a pink shirt, and a face with almost nothing happening on it. The hat is the only thing that does any work. Take the hat off and she becomes a generic drawing of a girl. That is not an insult to the artist. That was the assignment. She was meant to blend into the background of a family, and she does it so well that for long stretches of certain episodes it is possible to forget she is standing in the shot. The show did try, early on, to hand her a normal television life. In the second season episode, The Story on Page 1, which aired on July 18, 2000, Meg gets a job writing for her high school newspaper and ends up building a story around Mayor Adam West. And for a stretch of that episode, she is a real character with a real want and a real conflict. In the third season episode From Method to Madness, from January 24, 2002, she dates a boy named Jeff, whose entire family are nudists, and the story is about her trying to work out how far she is willing to go to keep somebody who likes her. Those are recognizable teenage stories, told plainly, with Meg at the center. They are not classics. They are not what anyone quotes, but they exist, and they prove that in the early years the writers were still making an honest attempt to build a person. In a show where a baby builds weather machines and a dog files taxes, the oldest daughter is the one person who is written as an ordinary human being with ordinary human problems. In a normal family sitcom, that would be a strength. In this show, it was a hole in the middle of the cast that nobody knew how to fill. The people who study television have a name for the seat Meg was supposed to sit in. On The Simpsons, that seat belongs to Lisa. The smart one. The moral one. The kid who sees what the adults refuse to see and says so out loud. And who gets ignored, and whose being ignored is the point. Lisa Simpson works because the writers give her real stories, real opinions, and real wins, often enough that the audience cares when she loses. Meg was lined up for that same job. She had the grades, she had the glasses, she had the position in the family. What she never got was the material. The stories went to Peter and Stewie and Brian, because those characters were easier to write and funnier per minute, and Meg drifted to the wall of the room and stayed there. The confusion shows up in the casting. In that original pilot presentation from 1998, Meg was voiced by Rachel McFarlane. When the show actually went to series in 1999, the role went to Lacey Chabert, who at the time was one of the more recognizable young actresses on television because of her work as Claudia on the Fox drama Party of Five. Chabert did the whole first season, all 7 episodes, and she was never credited for a minute of it. Her name did not appear on screen with the rest of the cast. There were contract reasons behind it, and Seth MacFarlane later told IGN in 2003 that he believed there had been a mistake in her contract, and that she had never intended to be involved for the full run of the show. She was in high school. She had a hit drama already eating her schedule. Balancing all of that with a weekly animated series was not going to work, and she stepped away. So the show needed a new Meg, and the person who got the job was a 15-year-old named Mila Kunis. She was not a famous voice actress. She was a teenage actor from a sitcom, working on That 70s Show, going out for a cartoon part like any other audition. She came in, and she came back, and she came back again. The producers kept asking her for the same thing over and over. Slow down. Speak more clearly. Say the words like you mean them. She has described walking out of those callbacks unsure whether she understood what they wanted from her. She got the part anyway. MacFarlane felt she brought something natural to the character that had not been there before, and he pointed to her work on That 70s Show as proof that she could hold a scene without shouting. Her voice is first heard as Meg in the second season episode Da Boom, and because of the mess in production order, the two voices actually flipped back and forth in the broadcast run for a while, before finally settling on Kunis for good. There is one more name in this story that almost nobody knows. On a DVD commentary for the cartoon Drawn Together, the voice actress Cree Summer said she had been offered the part of Meg and was then dismissed by the producers before she ever recorded a line. Add all of that up. Inside 2 years, 3 actresses recorded the same teenage girl, and a 4th was offered the part and let go. That does not happen because the performers are bad. It happens because the people making the show do not know what sound they are listening for, because they do not know what the character is. Nobody can cast a shape that has not been drawn yet. In those first 3 seasons, Meg is not the punching bag she would later become. She is something closer to a normal, slightly annoying teenager. She is whiny, she is uptight, she is permanently embarrassed by her family, and the show frames that embarrassment as reasonable, because her family is embarrassing. Peter humiliates her by accident, not on purpose. Lois tries to help and gets it wrong. The Griffins of Season 1 and Season 2 are careless with Meg, but they are not cruel to her. They mean well, and they fail. That is a very different thing from what came later. And even then, in those early friendly years, the show had already found the one Meg story it would tell forever. The 3rd episode ever made, Chitty Chitty Death Bang, aired on April 18, 1999. In it, Meg is desperate to make friends, so desperate that she falls in with a group of kind, welcoming, smiling young people who turn out to be a suicide cult. She does not join because she believes anything. She joins because they were nice to her. 3 episodes into the entire series, the writers had already figured out the shape of Meg Griffin. She will walk into a burning building if someone inside waves at her. That is a tragedy. Written as a joke, in April of 1999. Then the show died. Fox moved it around the schedule, put it up against Friends and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, watched the ratings drop, canceled it, brought it back, canceled it again. By May of 2002, there was no more Family Guy. For almost 3 years, nobody made a new episode. The show survived on DVD sales and late-night reruns on Adult Swim, and in the spring of 2005, Fox brought it back from the dead. Something important happened during those dead years, and it happened to Meg specifically. The show found its second life on the internet, message boards, fan sites. Forums where people argued about episodes all day. The audience that saved Family Guy was an online audience, and online audiences make lists. They rank the characters. They pick favorites. They pick least favorites. And in every one of those rankings, in every corner of every forum, the same name sat at the bottom. Meg. The fans hated her for being boring rather than for being awful. She had no jokes. She had no arc. She was the character who slowed the episode down. Somebody would post a list of the best Family Guy moments and there would be nothing with Meg in it. Somebody would post a list of the worst and there she was. The complaint was almost always the same and almost always mild. Nobody said she was offensive. Nobody said she ruined the show. They said she was the boring one, and then they moved on to arguing about Stewie. And the writers, sitting in a room in Los Angeles, waiting to find out whether they still had jobs, were reading all of it. That situation was unusual. Most television writers in 2003 were not getting instant, unfiltered, permanent feedback from thousands of strangers about which of their characters was dead weight. Family Guy was one of the first big network shows to come back to life, specifically because of an online fan base, which meant the people making it had spent years treating that fan base as the reason they were still employed. When an audience saves a show, the people who make it start listening to that audience. And this audience had one clear note about the oldest daughter. When Family Guy came back on the air on May 1, 2005, it came back with a huge episode order, a roaring audience, and a writing staff that had just spent 3 years learning exactly what the internet thought of their oldest daughter. They had a choice about what to do with that information. They could fix her, give her real stories, make the audience care about her, and turn the weakest link in the cast into something worth watching. Or they could agree with the crowd. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What the writers did next grew as a habit, one line at a time, until it swallowed the character whole. It started with 2 words out of Peter Griffin's mouth, in a room where nobody thought they were making history. Those 2 words ended up in the mouth of almost everybody in Quahog. Section 2. Shut up, Meg. A rule in comedy writing says that a catchphrase has to be about something. Peter Griffin has a laugh. Stewie Griffin has a way of saying what the deuce that announces he thinks he is smarter than the room. Quagmire has a noise he makes when he sees a woman. Every one of those is a piece of character information delivered fast. Each one lands and something about the speaker comes with it. The most repeated catchphrase in the history of Family Guy carries no information about the person saying it. It is 2 words. Shut up, Meg. All it delivers is that a girl in the room was talking and somebody would prefer that she stopped. The joke works like this, mechanically, and the mechanics matter. Meg says a line. It does not have to be a bad line. It does not have to be a whiny line, or a stupid line, or a line that deserves a comeback. It just has to be a line. Then Peter, usually without even turning his head, tells her to shut up. Then the scene continues as though she had never opened her mouth. The entire structure sits right there. There is no setup, because none is needed. There is no punchline, because the punchline is the dismissal itself. It takes 1 second of screen time, and it can be dropped into any scene in any episode of the entire series without changing a single other thing. For a writing staff working under deadline on a show that runs 22 minutes and needs a laugh roughly every 20 seconds, the line works as a tool. It is the cheapest, fastest, most reliable button in the entire drawer. Scene running long. Shut up, Meg. Scene needs a laugh before the act break. Shut up, Meg. 2 characters are talking and a third needs to be reminded she is on screen. Shut up, Meg. It costs nothing to write and it never fails to land. Because by the time the show came back in 2005, the audience had been trained to laugh at it before Peter finished saying it. And a tool that useful does not stay in one pair of hands. Watch the spread across the seasons, and it plays out like something moving through a building. At the start, it belongs to Peter alone. It is his line, part of his particular brand of thoughtless dad cruelty. Then Lois says it. Then Chris says it, and Meg actually gets angry and snaps it back at him, which is one of the very few times in the whole run she returns fire. Then Stewie says it. Then Brian, who is supposed to be the conscience of the household, says it. Then people outside the family say it. Then people who have just met her say it. By the later seasons, the show has built a world in which a stranger who has known Meg Griffin for 11 seconds understands, without being told, that she is the person everybody is allowed to talk to that way. There is a real line in the sand here, and it sits right at the cancellation. In the first 3 seasons, when the Griffins hurt Meg, they mostly did it by accident. Peter would do something idiotic in public, and Meg would be the one standing next to him, dying of embarrassment. Because that is what being 14 with a father like Peter would actually feel like. The family cared about her. They meant well. They were simply too stupid and too loud to be around. After the show came back in 2005, that changed, and it changed on purpose. The accidental embarrassment turned into deliberate bullying. The family stopped stepping on her by mistake and started aiming. That shift is the single most important thing that ever happened to this character, and it happened quietly, spread across dozens of episodes, with no announcement and no episode where anybody sat down and decided it. It was 100 small choices in 100 writers' rooms, each one of them individually defensible, adding up to something nobody would have approved if it had been proposed all at once. It also changed what the audience was being asked to do. Laughing at Peter is laughing at a fool who deserves it, because he brings every disaster on himself. Laughing at Stewie is laughing at a monster who is having a wonderful time. Laughing at Meg is a different act entirely, because Meg has not done anything. The joke asks the audience to find it funny that somebody is being hurt for no reason, and it works, because the show is fast and the music is bright and it is over before there is time to think about it. That speed is not an accident either. The gag is 1 second long precisely because 2 seconds would be long enough for the audience to notice what it was laughing at. The show is fully aware of this. It has played with the gag on purpose more than once. There is a version where a version of Meg from an earlier season and a version of Meg from a later season argue about which one is the real Meg, and they end up telling each other to shut up, and Peter walks in and shuts up both of them at once. There is a version where the family is admiring something sweet, and Meg asks a gentle, harmless question, and Peter tells her to shut up in a soft, warm, almost loving voice, the way a person speaks to a baby. In a Star Wars parody, Meg appears as a giant creature who complains that she never gets any lines in these things, and Peter flies over and tells her to shut up. In an episode set in a British version of the show, a British Meg makes a polite remark and gets told to shut up in a British accent. That last set of jokes is the show doing something specific. It is telling the audience that the gag is now bigger than the character. Meg can be a different age, a different species, a different nationality, from a different decade of the show, and the joke still applies, because the joke is attached to Meg existing and to nothing else. Over 400 episodes, that does something to a character. A person who cannot finish a sentence cannot have an argument. A person who cannot have an argument cannot have a position. A person who cannot have a position cannot have a story. Every single time a writer sat down to build a real episode around Meg Griffin, they had to fight against a running gag that the show itself had spent years teaching the audience to expect. The moment Meg starts speaking with any weight, part of the audience is already waiting for somebody to cut her off, because that is what has happened every other time. The gag did not just sit next to the character, it ate her. One number makes this clear better than anything else. Family Guy has been on the air since 1999. It has produced hundreds of episodes across more than 20 seasons. In all of that time, the single most famous, most repeated, most quoted line associated with Meg Griffin is a line that is said to her by somebody else, and its entire content is a demand that she be quiet. Peter has catchphrases. Stewie has catchphrases. Quagmire has catchphrases. Meg has a thing that other people say at her. The people who made the show have been asked about this, and their answers are worth hearing, because they are honest in a way that is a little uncomfortable. Mila Kunis, who has voiced Meg since she was 15 years old, described the character in an interview by saying that Meg gets picked on a lot, but that it is funny, in the way that a middle child is funny. She said Meg is permanently stuck at that awkward 16-year-old stage, going through the worst part of growing up and never coming out the other side, and that Meg lives in a constant state of humiliation, and that playing that is fun. She is not complaining. She has never complained. She has said many times that she loves the job and that Meg is one of the great gifts of her career. But read that description again with the character in mind, instead of the actress. Permanently 16. Permanently awkward. Permanently humiliated. Never allowed to come out the other side. That is a description of a person who is not allowed to grow, delivered cheerfully, as a job description. The criticism from outside the show was blunter. When the writers finally, years later, made an episode that tried to address all of this directly, the television critic Kevin McFarland wrote a review for the AV Club that put the whole thing plainly. He said he felt bad about Meg becoming the scapegoat, and then he explained exactly why. It was not because she was a good character. It was because, instead of doing the work of tweaking her, developing her, making her funny, or making her matter, the show had taken the path of least resistance and simply joined in with the crowd of fans who already disliked her. He added that one single episode of forced justification for that choice did not undo any of it. Nothing summarizes it more sharply. The show had a character with a problem. Fixing the problem was hard. Agreeing with the people who hated her was easy. So the show agreed with them for about a decade and called it comedy. And there is a part of this that almost nobody notices, which is the reason this entire video exists. What Meg actually does when she is told to shut up is the tell. She stops talking. That is it. She lowers her head, or she says something small, or she leaves the room, and then she comes back down for dinner the next night and sits in the same chair and tries again. She does not throw anything. She does not scream. She does not poison anybody's food or steal from anybody or ruin anybody's day to even the score. She does not go upstairs and plot. Now compare that with anybody else in this house. Stewie Griffin responds to being told no by building a device that will kill his mother. Peter Griffin responds to being mildly annoyed by burning down a building, starting a war with a neighbor, or destroying something that other people worked years to build. Brian responds to being embarrassed by lying, drinking, and taking it out on whoever is nearest. Lois responds to feeling unappreciated by doing something reckless and then acting surprised when there are consequences. Chris responds to fear by hiding. This is a show, in the truest sense, about a family of people who cannot absorb the smallest insult without exploding. And in the middle of that house sits a teenage girl who absorbs a direct, public, deliberate insult from her own father, several times a week, for over 25 years, and does not retaliate. Weakness is the word people reach for, because she is quiet, and because the show frames her quietness as pathetic. But there is a very simple test for whether a person is good, and being strong or clever or popular has nothing to do with it. The test is what they do with power they could use to hurt somebody and choose not to use. Meg has had 100 chances to make her family's lives worse, and she has passed on almost every one of them. That test comes back again and again across the rest of this video, run against every character in the show, and it keeps giving the same answer. The gag has one last chapter, and it is about what the show quietly admitted over time. In the last several seasons, the abuse has faded. It started thinning out around the 14th season, and by the 20th, it is close to gone. Modern Family Guy episodes will put Meg in a scene, let her talk, let her finish, and move on. Nobody announced this. There was no apology, no special episode, no statement from the producers saying the writers had thought better of it. The joke simply stopped being written, the way a habit stops when a room full of people quietly agree it is not funny anymore. The disappearance is its own kind of verdict. A joke that runs for 15 years and then evaporates without ceremony was never load-bearing and never essential to the show. It was a shortcut that everybody eventually got tired of, and the character underneath it spent 15 years paying for the fact that it was easy. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The gag started in Peter's mouth, and that was no accident. One person in this story has done more damage to Meg Griffin than the rest of the cast combined, and he is the one legally responsible for keeping her safe. What her father has done to her is a list that is hard to read in one sitting. Section 3. What Peter does to his daughter. A list of every single thing Peter Griffin has done to his oldest daughter, drawn from the full run of Family Guy, would be long enough to be its own video. It would also be, in places, difficult to read, because a lot of it stops being funny the moment it comes out of the timing and the music and the animation and goes down as plain sentences on a page. So that is what the next few minutes are for, with the jokes taken out of the frame and the actions underneath left standing on their own. Start at the beginning, because Peter starts at the beginning. In the episode Stewie Kills Lois, Peter is on a cruise ship, entertaining a table of strangers, and he tells them a story about the time he and Lois went to a clinic to end a pregnancy. He explains that they changed their minds after they got there, and got a look at the man who was going to perform the procedure, because the man only had one hand. Then, he delivers the tag. 2.5 months later, their daughter Meg was born. Lois is sitting right there and is horrified. The table laughs. Peter moves on. That is a father telling a room of people he does not know that his teenage daughter is alive by accident, and that the only reason she exists is that he got squeamish about a doctor. That gag exists in the canon of this show permanently. It has never been walked back. It is not the only version of it either. Across multiple episodes, across many years, the show returns again and again to the idea that Peter and Lois tried to leave Meg at a fire station when she was a baby. It comes up in Ratings Guy. It comes up again in Baking Sad, an episode that aired in December of 2023, which means the joke about abandoning her survived for over 2 decades of television. The show keeps returning to it because it is a reliable laugh, and because by that point, the audience had been trained to accept it as simply a true fact about this family. Then there is Her Name, and this one is permanent. In the 12th season episode A, Fistful of Meg, which aired on November 10, 2013, the show reveals something about Meg's birth certificate. Lois had chosen the name Megan. It is a normal name. It is the name she gave her daughter. And after Lois picked it, Peter went and altered the certificate so that the legal name of his firstborn child reads Megatron. Not as a private joke between parents. On the official document, forever, a man was given one job in the first week of his daughter's life, which was to record her name correctly, and he used it as a setup for a punchline that only he would ever find funny, and the punchline is permanently attached to her. The incidents themselves follow a very specific pattern. In the 2nd season episode Let's Go to the Hop, there is a drug scare going around James Woods High involving kids licking toads. Meg is caught holding one, and the reason she is holding it is heartbreaking on its own. She was carrying it for a popular kid because she thought that if she did him this favor, he might take her to the winter snowball. Peter decides the solution is to go undercover as a student, and he shows up at the school as a teenager named Lando Griffin. Within a day, he is the coolest kid in the building. He is more popular than his own daughter has been in her entire life. And then he takes the one thing Meg wanted out of the whole situation, which was a date to the dance, and he drops her for Connie D'Amico instead. He does it because being popular felt good, and he did not want it to stop. The shape is always the same. Peter almost never sets out to harm Meg. He sets out to enjoy himself, and she is standing between him and the thing he wants, and so she gets flattened. The damage is real, but the intent is absent, which is somehow worse, because nobody can be argued out of a habit they do not know they have. In the 4th season, episode 8, Simple Rules for Buying My Teenage Daughter, which aired on July 10, 2005, Peter runs up a tab at Mort Goldman's pharmacy. It gets out of hand. He buys 8 cases of Ipecac so that he can hold a vomiting contest with the boys. Eventually, Mort calls in the debt, and the debt is $34,000. Peter has no money. What he does have is a daughter, and a neighbor with a son named Neil, who has been obsessed with that daughter for years. So Peter offers to sell Meg to the Goldmans to clear his bill. He writes up a contract. Mort accepts. Meg finds out, and her reaction is exactly what any human being's reaction would be, which is to tell her father that he cannot sell her. Lois is furious. Peter smooths it over by giving Lois a greeting card, apologizing for trying to sell their daughter, and then jokes about how hard it was to find one of those in English. She eventually signs the contract herself, later, for her own reasons, because Neil is the only boy in the world who has ever wanted her, and she is jealous when he finds somebody else. The Goldmans then put her to work in their front yard as manual labor. The plot gets Peter off the hook. And in the wash of everything else that happens in that episode, the fact that a man traded his child to settle a pharmacy bill just becomes another thing that happened on a Sunday night. In the 7th season episode Peter's Daughter, Peter puts Meg in a coma. That is what happens on screen, plainly, with no interpretation required. The kitchen is flooding. There is real danger in the house. Peter sends Meg into that kitchen, and he sends her in for 2 reasons. He wants her to rescue the beer, and he wants her to make him a sandwich. She goes, because she always goes, and she gets hurt badly enough to end up unconscious in a hospital bed for a stretch of the episode. Then comes the part that explains the man completely. At her bedside, Peter promises that if she wakes up, he will treat her like a princess. And he means it. In that moment, he means it. She wakes up. She meets a medical student named Michael Milano. For the first time in the run of this show, Meg Griffin has a boyfriend who is kind to her, who is going somewhere in life, and who chose her. And Peter, keeping his promise the only way he knows how, smothers the relationship so completely with his idea of protecting her that Michael walks away. Meg panics and claims she is pregnant to hold on to him. They get engaged. She finally tells him the truth, hoping the truth will be enough. He leaves her standing at the altar. Peter caused the coma. Peter caused the breakup, and at no point does the show or the character connect those two facts. In Dial Meg for Murder, from January 31st, 2010, Peter decides he is going to compete in a rodeo. He has never done anything like it. He needs practice. So he rides a horse into his teenage daughter's bedroom, ropes her like livestock, and drags her out of the house. All of that is the cold open of an episode otherwise about how Meg goes to prison. Across the rest of the series, there is the running background hum of it, throwing things at her, passing gas in her face and holding her there, asking, out loud, why she is still living in the house. In one episode, he actively asks a higher power to remove her from existence. None of these are plot points. They are texture. They are the show establishing what the weather is like in that home. The pattern underneath all of it becomes clear once it has been seen. In almost every one of these incidents, Meg is punished for trying. She holds the toad because she is trying to get a date. She goes into the flooded kitchen because she is trying to be useful to her father. She signs the Goldman contract because she is trying to be loved by the only boy who ever noticed her. She stays in the family because she is trying to belong to it. Every single disaster in Meg Griffin's life starts with her reaching for something ordinary that any teenager would reach for, and the show punishes the reach itself. That is a very particular kind of cruelty, and it is the kind that teaches a person to stop reaching. Peter never learns any of this, because Peter never has to. There is no scene in this entire series in which Peter Griffin sits down and works out that his daughter has been carrying him for years. He gets flashes, he gets moments. He never gets the whole picture, because getting the whole picture would require him to be quiet long enough to hear her, and being quiet is the one thing this character has never been able to do, and the show has never needed him to get there. A version of Peter Griffin who understood what he had been doing to his oldest child would be a different character in a different series. And Family Guy has never shown any interest in writing that man. The case for Meg only holds up if the record on Peter is honest too. Peter Griffin is capable of loving his daughter, and the show has proved it more than once. In the 10th season episode Meg and Quagmire, which aired on January 8, 2012, Meg turns 18. Her birthday party is a disaster, and the only person who shows up for her is Glenn Quagmire, a man who has been waiting for this exact birthday for years, for reasons that do not bear thinking about. Meg, starved for any attention at all, starts seeing him. Lois tells Peter to stay out of it, arguing that pushing Meg will only make her rebel. Then the two of them go off to Quagmire's cabin, and Lois panics, and Peter does something he almost never does in 400 episodes. He drives out there, and he stops it. He tells Meg to get in the car. She tells him she is 18, and he cannot tell her what to do anymore. And Peter says the closest thing to a real father's line that this character has ever been given. She may be an adult, but she is still his daughter, and it is still his job to protect her. The next morning, Meg thanks her parents for not letting her make that mistake. There are other flashes of it. In This Little Piggy, he goes out of his way to pull her out of a business that is exploiting her feet for money. In the 14th season, in the episode Peter's Sister, Meg meets Peter's sister Karen, and she notices something nobody in that house has ever noticed before. Karen treats Peter exactly the way Peter treats Meg. Same tone, same dismissals, same casual contempt. And Meg does not use it against him. She bonds with him over it. The two of them plan to get back at Karen together, and the whole thing goes wrong when Meg swings a metal folding chair that turns out to be the real kind instead of the breakaway kind, and puts Karen in the hospital. That episode is important because of what Meg does with the information. She learns that her father was somebody's punching bag before he was ever her father. Any other character on this show would file that away as ammunition. Stewie would use it. Brian would use it in an argument. Meg uses it to feel closer to him. So no, Peter is not a monster who wakes up planning cruelty. He is something more ordinary and more common than that. He is a man with no impulse control who has found the one person in his entire life who will never make him pay for anything. Lois can withhold. Brian can argue back and land a real hit. Stewie is dangerous. Chris is a boy and mostly out of the line of fire. Meg has nothing. No leverage. No allies. No exit. And a man like Peter, given one relationship in which there are no consequences at all, will discover the bottom of that relationship purely by accident, over and over, for more than 25 years. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Peter is loud, and loud is easy to see. The person in that house who has done the deeper damage is quieter about it, and she is the one who was supposed to be standing between Meg and all of it. The worst thing anyone in Quahog ever said to Meg Griffin came from somebody else. Section 4. Lois is the worst one. Peter is loud. Loud is easy to talk about. Everything he does to Meg happens in the middle of the room with the lights on. And because it is loud, it is also, in a strange way, easier to forgive. Nobody expects wisdom from Peter Griffin. The show has spent more than 25 years establishing that he has the judgment of a toddler and the impulse control of a wasp. When he hurts his daughter, it lands like weather. Unpleasant, unavoidable, nobody's fault exactly. Lois Griffin is a different case entirely, and the case against her is much harder to shake off. Lois is not stupid. Her intelligence is the whole point of her. She is the competent one. She is the parent who runs the house, manages the money, keeps the children fed, and cleans up the wreckage after Peter drives another idea into a wall. The show has always positioned her as the adult in the building. She teaches piano. She holds down a household. She has opinions and she can defend them. Whatever else is true of Lois, she understands what is happening around her, which is exactly why what she does to Meg cannot be filed under weather. Begin with the thing the show itself has never really tried to soften. In the 7th season episode Steroids, which aired on April 26, 2009, and was written by Alex Sulkin, Chris Griffin becomes briefly popular after he starts dating the head cheerleader, Connie D'Amico. Popularity for Chris means a party, and the party happens at the Griffin house. Meg is upstairs. Meg was not invited to a party in her own home. Her brother, who has been an outcast for as long as she has, got one taste of being liked and immediately used it to lock her out. She goes to her mother. She says she was not invited. She says she hates her brother, hates her school, hates everyone, hates her life. This is a 16-year-old in real distress, in her own bedroom, saying so out loud, to a parent. And Lois, worn down, says she has been at this for 45 minutes and does not know what else she can say. Then she hands her daughter a Sylvia Plath book and a bottle of sleeping pills, tells her she is going to look the other way, and says that whatever happens, happens. Sylvia Plath was a poet who took her own life. The reference goes no further than that. There is no other reading of it. It is a mother, having decided that comforting her daughter is taking longer than she is willing to spend, handing that daughter a suggestion and leaving the room. 45 minutes. That is the number the writers chose, and the number is the joke. Anybody can run out of wisdom. The crime is that Meg's pain became an inconvenience with a running clock on it. And when the clock ran out, Lois did not just stop helping. She actively made it worse and walked away. Family Guy has produced a lot of dark material over more than 25 years. It has been sued, protested, banned, and dragged in front of the government. But there is a strong argument that this 40-second scene, in an episode most people do not even remember the name of, contains the single ugliest thing anybody on this show has ever done to another character. It came from the mother, calmly, in a normal speaking voice, while the fat idiot in the recliner sat somewhere else in the house. That is the worst single moment. The pattern underneath it is quieter and runs the whole length of the series. Lois almost never stops Peter. Go looking for the episode where Lois Griffin sits her husband down and tells him that the way he speaks to their daughter has to end, and the search takes a long time. She will fight him over money. She will fight him over the house, over his friends, over his schemes, over her own life. She has walked out on him. She has thrown things. The woman is not conflict averse. But the specific fight over how Peter treats Meg is a fight she has almost never picked, and that silence is a choice repeated several hundred times. What makes the silence stand out is that Lois is not silent about her other children. She is warm with Stewie constantly. She dotes on him, carries him, sings to him, talks to him in the voice parents use for babies they adore, and she does it in front of Meg for 2 decades. She goes to bat for Chris regularly, defends him at school, worries about his future, treats his problems as things that require a plan. When Chris is struggling, Lois Griffin becomes a project manager. When Meg is struggling, Lois Griffin becomes tired. That gap is the clearest evidence in the whole series. This woman knows exactly how to parent. She parents 2 other children in that same house, on camera, well enough that nobody ever writes video essays about how badly Chris and Stewie were treated. She has the tools. She uses them on the boys. She does not use them on her daughter, and the show never once offers an explanation for why. Whatever the reason is, the show has never been curious enough to write it down. Season after season goes by with the questions sitting in plain view. in a series that is normally happy to explain its own jokes at length, and this one stays blank. Then there is the competition. And this is the part that says the most about who Lois is. In the 4th season episode Don't Make Me Over, from June 5, 2005, Meg asks a boy named Craig Hoffman on a date, and he turns her down. She goes to her family for support. Lois, in what actually starts out as an act of real kindness, takes her to the mall for a free makeover. Meg comes out of it transformed. She is suddenly beautiful, and her popularity goes vertical, and she immediately becomes insufferable, which is a very human way for a 16-year-old to respond to the first good week of her life. Then the plot swallows her. Peter and his friends have started a band. The band bombs. The family gets pulled on stage to save the gig, with Meg singing lead, and they are a hit. A record executive signs them, and their producer explains, out loud, in the room, that the way to make everyone rich is to put Meg out front and sell her as a teenage sex object. Peter agrees enthusiastically. He calls it the smartest thing anyone has ever said about anything. The family rides Meg's new face all the way to New York and a spot on Saturday Night Live, and there, in front of a live national audience, Meg is humiliated so badly that she runs off the stage. The makeover ends. The popularity ends. She goes back to the hat and the glasses and the chair at the kitchen table. The whole episode is one long demonstration of what this family does with a good thing that happens to Meg. They monetize it, they exhaust it, and they leave her holding the bill. There is something worth noticing in how that story begins, though, and it is about Lois specifically. Look at the one time Lois reliably swings into action for her daughter. It is when the problem is that Meg is not pretty enough. It is a problem Lois understands. It is a problem Lois has tools for. She knows malls, she knows clothes, she knows how to walk into a room and be looked at, and when her daughter's suffering takes a shape she recognizes from her own life, she moves immediately. What she does not do is address the actual problem, which is that a boy said no to Meg and Meg came home broken about it. Lois never sits with that part. She skips straight to the fix, because sitting with it would be slow and uncomfortable and would require her to say something true. The makeover is help, and it is real help, and it is also a mother handing her daughter a new face instead of a reason to like the old one. When the new face wears off, Meg is exactly where she started, except now she has been famous for a week and knows precisely what she is missing. The direct competition between mother and daughter shows up elsewhere, and it is uglier. In the 8th season episode Go, Stewie Go, Meg starts dating a young man named Anthony, who is, by the standards of Meg's romantic history, a miracle. He is attractive, he is normal, he is kind to her. Every other character in the show reacts to his existence with open confusion, because a normal person choosing Meg does not compute in the world the writers had built by then, and Lois kisses him. The beat is exactly that plain. Meg's mother is caught kissing the first decent boyfriend her daughter has ever had. Whatever the show does with it afterward, the fact sits there in the record. There is a version of this in 8 Simple Rules for Buying My Teenage Daughter Too. When the contract has to be voided, the solution the family lands on is for Lois to dress up and seduce Neil Goldman, so that he technically cheats on Meg. It is framed as Lois helping. It works. But look at the mechanics of the help. The problem is solved by proving to everyone in the story, including Meg, that Meg's own mother can take any boy away from her at any time, without effort. The show has a name for what Lois is to Meg, even if it never says it out loud. Lois is the foil. Where Meg is uptight, Lois is loose. Where Meg is embarrassed, Lois is shameless. Where Meg cannot get a date, Lois has a history that keeps producing new revelations well into the later seasons. Lois came from money and ran away from it. She was wild, she was wanted, and she looks at her daughter every day across a kitchen table and sees a girl who is none of those things. In a house Lois chose. In a life Lois built. That is the psychology, and it is a real one that exists in real families. A parent who escaped something looks at a child who did not and does not know what to do with the feeling. Some parents push, some parents pull away. Lois does something worse than either. She competes, and then she gets bored, and then she leaves the room. In fairness, and this section needs the fairness, Lois Griffin is capable of loving her daughter. The show has proved it several times. In Barely Legal, when Brian confesses that he made out with Meg at her junior prom, Lois is furious in the exact way a protective mother should be. In the 10th season, when Meg is at Quagmire's cabin, Lois is the one who realizes what she has allowed to happen and immediately goes to stop it, and she is the one who confronts Quagmire directly afterward and makes it clear what will happen to him if he ever tries it again. In the 22nd season, episode Snapple Decision, which aired on November 26, 2023, Lois takes Meg on a vacation, and when the two of them are targeted by kidnappers, Lois defends her daughter without hesitation. Those episodes are real. They are in the canon. Lois will fight for Meg when the danger is external and visible and shaped like a stranger. But that fairness cuts the wrong way. If Lois were simply cold, if she did not care at all, the years of neglect would be sad but consistent. The fact that she is capable of protecting Meg, and does it well when she bothers, means every other time is a choice. She knows how. She has the skill. She has the instinct. She just does not spend it on the daily grinding stuff, the everyday stuff, the version of protection that would mean telling her husband to stop, or sitting on a bed for longer than 45 minutes. There is one moment in the entire series where this gets said out loud, and it happens during a hurricane in the 10th season. When Meg finally breaks and tells her family exactly what she thinks of each of them, the attack on Lois is the one that lands hardest and cuts deepest, and Lois does not argue. She does not defend herself. She admits, on screen, that she has been a terrible mother to her daughter. Then the episode ends, and nothing changes. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Meg has two parents, and both of them have failed her, one loudly and one quietly. But in this house, the failure does not stop with the adults. 3 more people live under that roof, and every one of them had a chance to stand next to her, and every one of them passed. Section 5. The brother, the baby, and the dog. 3 other people live in that house, and each one of them represents a different way of failing the same girl. One of them should have been her ally and sold her out. One of them is a declared monster who somehow treats her better than anybody expected. And one of them is the character the show holds up as its conscience, which makes what he does the hardest to look at. Start with the brother, because the brother is the one that hurts. Chris Griffin is 13 or 14 years old for most of the show, which puts him close enough to Meg in age that they share the same school, the same social world, and the same problem. Chris is not popular either. Chris is overweight, awkward, slow, and frightened of things. He is bullied. He gets left out. He knows exactly, precisely, in his bones, what it feels like to be the kid at the edge of the room, because he is usually standing right next to her at that same edge. He is the natural ally. In any honest story about a family like this, Chris and Meg would find each other, because 2 people at the bottom of the same pile always do. Instead, in Steroids, Chris gets one taste of being liked, 1 week of standing next to Connie D'Amico and being treated like somebody, and he uses it to throw a party in his own house and keep his sister out of it. Not out of a nightclub, not out of a group he barely belongs to. Out of the living room she lives in. He knew what it would do to her, because it has been done to him. He did it anyway, and he did it fast, because the price of staying popular is having somebody underneath him. He does it again in a later episode where Meg is believed dead. Chris does not grieve. Chris works out that having a tragically deceased sister makes him interesting at school, and he milks it. And when she turns up alive and threatens to blow the whole thing up, he takes her prisoner rather than lose the attention. When Meg finally gets to say everything she has been holding, one of the first people she turns on is Chris, and the thing she says to him is the simplest sentence in the entire monologue. He is her brother. He is supposed to be on her side, and he treats her like he hates her, constantly, and she does not know why. That is the accusation, and Chris has no answer for it, because there is no answer. He is not cruel by nature. He is scared, and he found somebody to stand on. This is the oldest and saddest mechanism in any school in the world. The kid one rung up the ladder is almost never the one who reaches down. He is the one who kicks, because the only thing keeping him off the bottom is the fact that somebody else is already there. Chris Griffin is not a villain. He is a frightened boy who worked out very early that as long as Meg exists, he is not last, and he has been quietly protecting that arrangement ever since. To be fair to the show, it did eventually work this out. In the later seasons, Chris and Meg get paired up over and over, and those episodes are consistently among the better Meg material the series has produced. They team up to get even with a retirement home full of people who mistreated her. They dress up as a young couple to spy on their parents on holiday, put the 2 of them alone in a scene without Peter in it, and something real appears almost immediately, because these 2 characters make sense together. It just took the writers about 15 years to notice. Now the baby, and the baby is not what anybody expects. Stewie Griffin is, on paper, the worst person in this family by a distance. He has attempted murder more times than anyone can count. He has built weapons in a nursery. He has expressed a desire to end his mother's life so many times that it became the character's original defining trait. When Stewie is unpleasant to Meg, it is ugly. In Don't Make Me Over, while she is crying, he leans in, tastes her tears, and tells her that her anguish sustains him. In 8 Simple Rules, he tells her, in the flat tone of somebody offering a helpful tip, that if she ended things now, she would probably get a full page in the yearbook. Those are horrible lines. They are also, and this matters, not personal. Stewie is exactly that horrible to everyone. He is horrible to Lois. He is horrible to Brian, who is his best friend in the world. He is horrible to strangers, to babies, to animals, and to inanimate objects. Being on the receiving end of Stewie Griffin is a condition of being alive in Quahog. There is no special file with Meg's name on it. He is not singling her out, and in this particular house, not being singled out is close to a compliment. And then, there is the other half of the record, which almost nobody talks about. Stewie likes sitting on Meg's lap. The show has established it many times, and it is always played straight, never as a gag at her expense. Given the choice between his mother and his sister, this baby, who is supposedly indifferent to everyone, picks Meg. In the 10th season, when Meg is taken by human traffickers, it is Stewie and Brian who go after her and bring her home. In the 17th season episode Stand By Meg, from November 11, 2018, Meg saves Stewie from choking to death on a grape, and Stewie, who does not respect anyone, respects her from then on. In the 22nd season episode Baking Sad, from December 3, 2023, Stewie and Brian are the ones who help her get a cookie business off the ground. The conclusion is a strange one. The declared villain of the household, the one who says the ugliest lines, has a better record with Meg than her own brother does. Because Stewie's cruelty is weather, and his kindness is deliberate. And with Chris, it runs the other way around. The dog is the one that matters. Brian Griffin is the show's conscience. It is his job in the ensemble. He reads books. He has politics. He gets angry about hypocrisy. He is the character the writers hand a moral argument to when a moral argument is needed, and he spends a lot of screen time explaining to other people why what they are doing is wrong. In the early years, Brian is also the best friend Meg has. He is on record admitting that he cares about her. He notices her. He is capable of talking to her like a person, which in that house is close to a superpower. Then, there is Barely Legal, which is where all of that goodwill goes to die. That episode aired on December 17, 2006. It was written by Kirker Butler and directed by Zach Moncrief. The setup is that Meg cannot find a date for her junior prom. The show establishes how impossible this is with a gag that shows exactly how far the writers had gone by season 5. A boy shoots his own brother, so that he will have a funeral to attend, so that he will not have to take Meg to a dance. Meg comes home and threatens to end her own life over it. It is the pressure that finally moves Brian. He agrees to take her because she has made it impossible not to. Then look at what he does at the actual dance, because it is both the kindest and the cruelest sequence in Meg's entire history. He gets drunk. He gets drunk on purpose, in order to survive the evening with her, which is a thing she can see him doing. And then, near the end of the night, Connie D'Amico goes after Meg the way Connie always does, and Brian steps in and destroys her. Not with an insult about her looks. He takes Connie apart properly, explaining exactly why a girl like that picks on a girl like Meg, laying out the whole sad mechanism of her cruelty in public. It is the single greatest thing anybody has ever done for Meg Griffin. Somebody defended her, out loud, in front of the entire school, and won. And then they kiss. And then Brian throws up. And then he tells her that the throwing up was the alcohol and had nothing to do with her. That is the formative romantic experience of this character's life. The one time she was chosen, defended, and kissed, she was chosen out of obligation, defended by somebody who had to get drunk to be there, and kissed by somebody who then had to explain that the vomiting was unrelated. Of course she becomes obsessed with him afterward. Of course the rest of that episode spirals into her doing alarming things to keep him. She was handed 1 hour of being wanted and no instructions. Brian's record with her only gets more tangled from there. In Dial Meg for Murder, he is the one who follows her, discovers her secret, and tells her parents, which sets off the chain of events that puts her in prison. He is the reason her life falls apart in that episode. He is also the one who walks into the pharmacy at the end and talks her out of the robbery, and the way he does it is by showing her the article he wrote about her, the one that proves that somebody was paying attention to who she actually was the whole time. He breaks her, and then he saves her. In the same 22 minutes. After roughly the 10th season, the salvage work stops. Brian's decency toward Meg largely evaporates as the character himself gets shallower and more self-involved. In Friends Without Benefits, he goes to real effort to avoid having to comfort her. In No Country Club for Old Men, he finds it funny when she is thrown up on. In Once Bitten, he is willing to relieve himself on her bed. The dog who reads Russian novels and lectures the family about ethics ends up treating her worse in the later seasons than the baby who once described her suffering as nourishing. One more Brian moment belongs here, and it is the strangest note in his whole relationship with her. On the night Meg finally says everything, the only person who tells her she did the right thing is Brian. He tells her she stood up for herself. He tells her she might be the strongest person in that house. It is the most generous thing anyone in the series has ever said about her, and it is completely sincere. He says it while he is coming down off a bad reaction to psychedelic mushrooms, having spent the entire episode hiding in a baby's crib. He missed the fight. He did not see what she went through. He heard the aftermath from a girl sitting on the floor of the living room, and he offered her a compliment, and then the episode ended. That is Brian Griffin in one image. The right words, delivered late, by somebody who was not there. That is why Brian is the worst of the three. Chris is a frightened kid who took the only ladder he saw. Stewie is a stated monster who is at least consistent about it. Brian is the one who knows the words. He can explain in detail why cruelty is wrong. He has done it on screen, many times, at length, usually while feeling very good about himself. And when it was his turn, he did it anyway. Run the test on the three of them, and it comes out the same way it always does. Chris has hurt Meg to protect his own standing, more than once, deliberately. Stewie has said things to her that would end most relationships. Brian has ratted her out, humiliated her, and then spent whole seasons finding new ways to avoid her. Every one of them has taken a shot when she was already down, and Meg has never once evened the score with any of them. She has never sold Chris out to get a spot at a table. She has never used what she knows about Brian, and she knows plenty, because she is in the house and she is quiet, and quiet people hear everything. She has never harmed Stewie, and she has, on at least one documented occasion, saved his life. 4 other people under that roof, and one of them is running a completely different operating system from the rest. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. All of this is happening inside one house, which is bad enough on its own. But Meg leaves that house every single morning, and the thing waiting for her outside the front door runs on exactly the same rules. Quahog agreed with the Griffins a long time ago, and the show built an entire town around the idea. Section 6. The town joins. In one detail separates Meg Griffin from every other mistreated character in animation. Charlie Brown gets it rough at school and goes home to a quiet house. Lisa Simpson is misunderstood by her family and finds friends and teachers who see her. Almost every put-upon character in television history has one door they can walk through where the pressure stops. Meg does not have a door. She walks out of the house in the morning, and the town is running the same program as the kitchen. The show made this official. The rule inside the world of Family Guy is that almost everybody in Quahog who knows Meg, or who has simply met her once, will pick on her, and the reason given is not that she is annoying, or rude, or unpleasant. The reason given is not that she is Meg. The whole justification stops there. Her name functions as a cause. That is a very unusual thing for a comedy to build, and it took years to build it. The escalation across the seasons shows the writers finding the ceiling and then going through it. In the early years, the cruelty is ordinary high school cruelty, and it comes mainly from one person. Connie D'Amico is the head cheerleader at James Woods Regional High School, and she is Meg's designated tormentor. She is popular, she is pretty, she is casually vicious, and she has spent the entire run of the show reminding Meg where she stands. Connie is not a complicated creation. She is the alpha girl from every teen movie ever made, dropped into a cartoon. The show did once explain her, and it did it through Brian, at the junior prom in Barely Legal. He takes Connie apart in front of everyone by laying out the actual machinery of what she is. She developed early. She got treated a certain way because of it. She has terrible self-esteem underneath all the noise, and she manages it by finding girls like Meg and standing on them. It is a good piece of writing, and it is the closest the series ever comes to acknowledging that bullies are usually running from something. But it changes nothing. Connie goes right back to it in the next episode she appears in, and the show goes right back to using her because the arrangement is too useful to give up. The same pattern repeats across the whole series. Family Guy is perfectly capable of understanding what it is doing. It can produce, on demand, an accurate and even compassionate explanation of why a bully bullies. It just refuses to let that understanding change anything, because changing something would cost the show a reliable joke. The insight goes in, the audience nods, and the very next week, Connie is shoving Meg into a locker again, like the conversation never happened. The show gets credit for the depth without paying any of the price for it. Then there is Neil Goldman. Neil is the nerdy classmate who has been obsessed with Meg since the early seasons. He is named after a real writer who worked on Family Guy, which is a small in-joke that has outlived almost everybody's memory of it. He is small, awkward, unpleasant to look at by the show's design standards, and he wants Meg badly. Look at the trap that creates, because it is a nasty one. The show establishes that no boy in Quahog wants Meg. Then it gives her exactly one admirer, and it makes him the one boy she does not want, and then it spends years mining comedy out of her refusing him. If she rejects Neil, she is a snob who cannot afford to be picky. If she accepts Neil, she is settling, and the joke is that this is her level. There is no version of that story where she gets to come out of it with any dignity, which is the point. And when she finally does try, in 8 Simple Rules for Buying My Teenage Daughter, when she swallows the whole thing and signs the contract herself because she has decided she would rather be wanted by Neil than by nobody, the Goldmans put her to work as manual labor in their front yard. Even the pity option turns out to be a trap. Notice also what Meg never does to Neil, because it is the same story as everything else. She has, sitting right there, a boy who would do anything she asked. He has followed her, written about her, and built his whole personality around wanting her. It is real power. A crueler person would use it, and plenty of teenagers do. Meg could have kept Neil on a string for years, taken favors, taken gifts, taken the ego boost of having somebody desperate for her attention, and given nothing back. It would have cost her nothing, and it would have been very easy. She never does it. When she does not want him, she tells him she does not want him. When she briefly thinks she does, she signs a contract to prove she means it. Whatever else Meg Griffin is, she does not keep people around to feed on them. Then the escalation gags start, and this is where the show crosses from cruelty into something almost surreal. In one episode, a boy in shop class fires a nail gun into his own abdomen. Twice. He does it deliberately, to injure himself badly enough that he will not have to go on a date with Meg. In Barely Legal, another boy shoots his own brother, so that there will be a funeral, so that he has an excuse to skip a school dance rather than attend it with her. In Don't Make Me Over, Lois takes Meg shopping, and a saleswoman gets one look at Meg trying on a pair of jeans, pours gasoline over herself, strikes a match, and goes out of a window. Those 3, read back to back, all run on the same premise. Proximity to Meg Griffin is worse than serious injury, and worse than death. And any reasonable person would choose the injury. Her personality has nothing to do with it. Neither does her voice or anything she has ever said or done in front of anybody. The show did not start there. It arrived there over about 6 seasons, one escalation at a time, because each new writer had to top the last one, and the only direction available was further. There is a practical reason the joke spread out of the house, and it explains everything else. A gag that only works when Peter is in the room is a gag worth maybe twice an episode. A gag that works anywhere, with anyone, in any setting, is a gag worth 6 times an episode that never runs dry. So the writers made it portable. They loosened it from Peter, loosened it from the family, and eventually loosened it from any character at all, until it became a background rule of the universe, like gravity. Once that happened, a random cashier could deliver it, a teacher could deliver it, a person who had never met her could deliver it, and the audience would still laugh, because the audience had been taught the rule. The school itself runs on it. The staff at James Woods Regional High are not neutral bystanders. Teachers join in. Administrators join in. Nobody in that building has ever taken Meg's side against a student, and nobody in that building has ever noticed that one of their pupils is being ground down every single day in their hallways. Adults are supposed to be the failsafe in a story about a bullied teenager. In Quahog, the adults are part of the crowd. Then there is Glenn Quagmire, and this one is worth being plain about. Quagmire is one of the most popular characters this show has ever produced. He is the neighbor, the pilot, the man with the catchphrase, the reliable laugh. He is also a grown adult who has spent years openly tracking how old the teenage girl next door is. He has asked, out loud, whether she has reached the legal age yet. The joke, repeated across seasons, is that he is keeping count. And then, in the 10th season episode Meg and Quagmire, on the night Meg finally turns 18, when nobody else comes to her birthday, he is the one who shows up, because he has been waiting for that specific date. The show plays the whole thing as farce, Peter chasing him around, Lois threatening him, a comic race to the cabin, and underneath the farce is the plain fact of what the audience has been laughing along with for a decade, which is a man counting down to a child. Meg, for her part, goes along with it for the reason she goes along with everything. He came to her party. Nobody else did. Now, in a town this bad, the exceptions matter, and there are exactly two. Cleveland Brown is decent to her. Repeatedly. When things at the Griffin house become unbearable, Cleveland is the one who lets Meg stay at his place. He does it in 15 minutes of shame. He does it again in Petarded. He does not make a speech about it, and the show does not treat it as an event. He just quietly takes in a teenage girl who has nowhere else to go, more than once, and he is the only person in Quahog who has ever done that. Joe Swanson is the other one. In The Hand That Rocks the Wheelchair, Joe accidentally hits Meg with his vehicle. He rushes her to the hospital, and then, afterward, he tells her that he is lucky to have her as a neighbor. That is it. That is all of it. And it is one of maybe 5 sincere compliments Meg receives in more than 25 years of television. The fact that Meg then becomes intensely attached to Joe afterward, and the fact that the show turns that into a plot about her fixation, shows exactly how starved she is. One kind sentence from a neighbor is enough to reorganize her entire inner life. 2 men in an entire town, neither of them related to her. Both of them her father's friends, doing a better job of being decent to her than her father ever managed. She does have friends, and this is a thing people forget when they talk about Meg. There is a small group of girls who turn up around her across the seasons, Beth and Patty and Esther and Ruth and a few others, and they are all in exactly the same position she is. Unpopular, dateless, left out. They sit in her bedroom and talk about boys and eat snacks and do the things teenagers do when nobody has invited them anywhere. There is also Bruce, who she is friendly with at the bowling alley, and who treats her like a normal person because that is who Bruce is. The honest part, which the case for Meg cannot skip, is this. There is one occasion where she abandoned those friends. In Don't Make Me Over, when the makeover lands and she is suddenly beautiful and suddenly popular, Meg becomes a snob almost immediately. She looks down on the people who stood by her. She enjoys it. That happened. It is in the record, and it should be in the record. But look at how long it lasts, and look at what happens when it ends. It lasts 1 episode. The moment the fame collapses and the humiliation arrives, she goes straight back to those same girls, and they take her back, and it is never spoken of again. She had 1 week of power in her entire life, and she handled it badly for about 11 minutes of screen time. Compare that with what every other character in this show does with power: Peter with money, Peter with fame, Stewie with any advantage at all, Brian the second anybody calls him a writer, Lois with a microphone, Chris with a single week of popularity, which he spent locking his own sister out of her house. Meg is the only person in Quahog whose behavior does not change much based on how she is being treated. She is decent when the town is cruel to her, and she is decent when it is not. And the one time she slipped, she came back on her own. What that town-wide rule left behind is the reason Meg Griffin reads differently from every other mistreated character in animation. Charlie Brown gets to go home when the school day ends. Lisa Simpson gets a teacher who sees her. Meg got a rule written into the physics of her own show, and she lived underneath it for a decade and a half without ever once turning it back on anybody. 2 of her father's friends managed basic decency toward her, and the rest of Quahog joined the crowd. And the girl in the middle of all of it kept getting up, kept going to school, and kept being the same person on both sides of the front door. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Everything so far has been about what Quahog does to Meg, but there is a much harder question underneath all of it, and the show has answered it more than once without anybody really noticing. She could have left, and she had real chances, with doors open and a road out of town. Every single time, she made the same decision. Section 7. Every time she tried to leave. There is a version of this argument that is easy and wrong, and it goes like this. Meg is good because Meg suffers. She takes the hits, so she must be a good person. That is not an argument. Plenty of people suffer and are not good, and suffering by itself does not prove anything about anybody. Being trapped is not a virtue. If Meg Griffin were simply a girl with no options, stuck in a house she could not leave, then all of this would be sad and nothing more. So the real question is the only one that matters, which is whether she ever had a way out. She did. Several. The show has given Meg Griffin a genuine exit at least 6 separate times, with the door open, the road clear, and something better waiting on the other side. And every single time, she has made the same decision, and the show has never once framed that decision as heroic. The earliest one is also the purest. In the second season episode 15 Minutes of Shame, which aired on April 25, 2000, Meg finally reaches her limit. Peter has humiliated her at a town festival by ending up naked in public, and then humiliated her again in front of her friends at her own slumber party, and Meg decides to fight back. She books the family onto a daytime talk show so that she can call them out on national television. It backfires spectacularly. The Griffins are so entertaining that a producer offers them their own reality show, and the family says yes. And now Meg's entire home life is on cameras 24 hours a day. She is being humiliated professionally, for money, with her own parents cashing the checks. So she leaves. She quits the family and quits the show, which is exactly what a reasonable person would do. And the producers do not beg her to come back. They replace her. They bring in a young actress who is prettier and more marketable, and the audience does not notice or care, and the show gets more popular without her in it. Meg then tries to build a life somewhere else. She tries to move in with Cleveland. She tries Quagmire. Neither works out, and at the end of the episode, she goes back to her family, who by then are living in a motel room, and she takes her place with them again. That is the first time the show puts her in front of a door and lets her walk through it, and it is also the first time she comes back. Season 2. The pattern was set before most of the audience even knew who she was. And notice the specific humiliation buried in that episode, because the writers were being unusually honest about themselves. Meg gets replaced on the family's own show by a prettier, more marketable girl, and the ratings go up. That is not a joke about Meg. That is a joke about the entertainment industry, and about audiences, and about what happens to a plain, difficult, real teenage girl when she is measured against a manufactured one. The people writing Family Guy in the year 2000 understood exactly what they were doing to this character, and they put the explanation in the episode, and then they carried on doing it for another 20 years. The one time she went after money of her own went much the same way. In the 5th season episode Hell Comes to Quahog, which aired on September 24, 2006, Meg wants a car. She is a teenager in America, and she wants a car, which is one of the most normal desires a person can have. Peter takes her to the dealership and buys a military tank instead, because he is Peter, and the tank ends up impounded after he runs over Joe with it while teaching Meg to drive. So Meg does the thing nobody else in that house has ever done. She goes and gets a job. She gets hired at Superstore USA, the huge new megastore that has just opened in town, and she starts earning her own money, and she is good at it. She climbs. She is, at that point in the episode, the only member of the Griffin family with employment. And the store she works for is destroying Quahog. It is hoarding electricity in the middle of a heat wave. It is putting the small businesses out of business. Cleveland loses his job. Mort loses his job. The town gets uglier and poorer every week the store stays open. Brian lays out exactly what the company is doing and why it is wrong. The one place in the world where Meg Griffin was succeeding turned out to be built on the ruin of everyone around her, and when the store's grip on the town finally breaks, her position goes with it, and she is back at the kitchen table where she started. Now the one that says the most about her character, and it is one almost nobody talks about. In the 4th season episode Brian Sings and Swings, from January 8, 2006, a girl at school named Sarah invites Meg to join a club. Meg says yes, because Meg always says yes to anyone who asks her to join anything. The club turns out to be the school's lesbian alliance. Meg does not leave. She looks around the room and she sees what she has been chasing for 6 years of television. A group of people who are pleased she showed up, so she plays along. She says she is a lesbian. She acts attracted to Sarah. She kisses her to prove it, and for a stretch of that episode, Meg Griffin is a member of a group that likes her, wants her there, and defends her, which is more than her own household has ever managed. All she has to do to keep it is keep lying. She goes to Sarah's house at the end and tells her the truth. She admits she made it up, She gives the whole thing back, on purpose, and walks away from the only social acceptance she had, because a girl actually liked her, and Meg was not willing to keep taking that under false pretenses. Think about how rare that is in this show. Every other character in Family Guy would have kept the lie going for 11 seasons and turned it into a running gag. Peter has faked entire identities for less. Brian has lied about his novel, his politics, and his history to impress women he barely knew. Lois has lied for fun. Stewie lies as a hobby. Meg had one thing, and it cost somebody else something to keep it, so she gave it back. Then there is Don't Make Me Over, which belongs in this list too, because for 1 week Meg had the entire package. Beauty, popularity, a record deal, a spot on national television. It was the exit. And what the episode does with it is put her family on top of the exit and ride it until it collapses under her. Then there is Dial Meg for Murder, which contains the single most direct version of this. After prison, when Meg has decided she is done, her plan is to get money and get out. The goal is that simple: leave Quahog. And she is talked out of it, in the last minutes of the episode, by somebody showing her one small piece of evidence that she is seen. It took nothing more than that, 1 page of writing, that treated her like a person, and she stayed. And then there is the legal one. In Meg and Quagmire, on January 8, 2012, Meg turns 18. She says it out loud in that episode, to her father, in the middle of an argument. She is 18, and he cannot tell her what to do anymore. It is the plain truth. As of that birthday, Meg Griffin is legally an adult who can walk out of that house, and nobody in Quahog has any power to stop her. She is still there. Season after season, year after year, more than a decade of television later, she is still in that house. The show has actually cataloged this, quietly, across many episodes. Meg has been given chances at a different life more than once, in different shapes, and the pattern in every case is that she stands by the Griffins even when standing by them costs her something real. She is the only member of that family who has never seriously tried to get rid of the others. Set that beside the character sitting in the high chair. Stewie Griffin spends entire seasons of this show openly trying to be free of his family. He views their stupidity as an obstacle to his life. He has plotted against Lois since the day he was born. He wants out, and he says so. Meg has never once said it. Not in the way Stewie says it. Even in her worst moment, the closest she comes is telling her mother that when she turns 18, she does not know whether she wants to be around any of them ever again. That is a wound talking. There is one more piece of evidence that belongs here, and it is scattered across so many episodes that most viewers have never assembled it into a single picture. Meg Griffin is talented. Not a little. A lot. Across the run of this series, the show has established that she can do bird calls well enough to impress people who do it for a living. She plays the saxophone. She sings well enough that a record executive signed her family on the strength of it. She speaks and sings in languages she was never shown learning. She is a strong bowler. She has played field hockey and basketball. She has competed in roller derby. She has held her own in Olympic-level sport. Put a physical or musical skill in front of Meg Griffin, and she will be good at it inside 1 episode. The part that makes it hurt comes next. Every single time one of these abilities comes out, her parents are surprised. Every time. They do not know she can do any of it. Season after season of living in the same house, eating dinner at the same table, and Peter and Lois are shocked, over and over, to learn that their daughter is capable of things. The show plays that surprise as a joke, and it is a joke. And it is also the plainest statement of the whole problem. Meg has never lacked the raw material to build a life somewhere else. She has the ability. What she has never had is one adult who noticed the ability existed and told her what to do with it. So put the two things next to each other, because this is the whole argument of the video in one comparison. A person who stays because they cannot leave is trapped. A person who leaves and comes back is choosing. Meg has left. She has left more than once. She has walked out of that house, taken a job, joined another group, found a boyfriend, gotten famous, turned 18, and made a plan to disappear with cash in her hand. And every time, she came back to a family that had not asked her to. Nobody in that house ever comes to get her. In every one of these stories, when Meg goes, the Griffins carry on. They do not organize a search. They do not sit around the table wondering how she is doing. In the reality show episode, they replace her and get more famous. In the prison episode, they do not visit. The show is very consistent about this. Meg leaving is not a crisis for anybody but Meg, so the return is entirely hers. She is not dragged back, she is not guilted back, and she is not persuaded back by anybody making a case. She goes, she looks at what is out there, and she comes home to people who did not notice she was missing, because whatever else they are hers. There is a word for making that choice repeatedly, with full knowledge of what it costs, and weakness is not it. A person who has never seen the outside and stays is trapped. A person who has seen the outside, walked around in it, tried it on, and then came back to a house that treats her badly, is doing something else entirely. She is deciding, again and again, that these particular people are hers, and that whatever is out there is not worth what leaving them would cost. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one exception, and it is the only time Meg Griffin ever stopped choosing them. She came home from somewhere that changed her, and for about 10 minutes of television, the girl in the pink hat was the most frightening person in Quahog. What the family did next says more about them than any insult ever has. Section 8. The night Meg became the monster. Every long-running show eventually makes the episode where the character it has spent years pushing around finally pushes back, and almost none of them mean it. The pushback lasts a scene. The old arrangement returns before the credits, and nothing is different the following week. Family Guy made that episode in the winter of 2010, and for about 10 minutes it committed to it completely. The girl at the end of the table came home from somewhere that had rearranged her, and the house that had spent 11 years talking over her went quiet. This is the story of the night Meg Griffin stopped taking it, and what her family did the moment she did. On January 31st, 2010, Family Guy aired the 11th episode of its 8th season. It was called Dial Meg for Murder. It was written by Alex Carter and Andrew Goldberg, directed by Cindy Tang, and it had been announced to fans months earlier at San Diego Comic-Con in 2009, which means the show knew it had something. There is a small piece of accidental symmetry in that date that nobody planned. The very first episode of Family Guy aired on January 31st, 1999. 11 years later, to the exact day, the show aired the episode in which Meg Griffin finally stops taking it. The episode opens the way most of her episodes open. Peter has decided to enter a rodeo. He has no experience. He needs to practice. So he rides a horse into Meg's bedroom, throws a rope around his teenage daughter, and drags her out of the house across the floor. It is a cold, open gag. It lasts about 20 seconds. It is also, in plain terms, a man using his child as livestock, and the show does not slow down for it at all. The actual story starts with Brian. He meets an editor from a teen magazine and lands himself a writing job, and the assignment is a profile of the average American teenage girl. He looks around for a subject and settles on the girl who lives in his house. So Brian starts following Meg. And what he finds is that Meg Griffin has a secret life. She has been going to the Quahog prison. She has been going for a while. There is a man in there named Luke, and Meg is in love with him, and she has been visiting him, and writing to him, and waiting for him. This is how she met him. It was a school pen pal project, a classroom assignment where students write letters to inmates. Meg wrote a letter to a stranger in a prison, and the stranger wrote back. That is the whole mechanism of this character in one sentence. Somebody wrote back. The bar sits exactly there. Not charm, not looks, not money, not kindness. Somebody, anywhere in the world, under any circumstances, replied to her. And she gave him everything she had, and she waited for him through a parole hearing that went badly, and she was prepared to keep waiting for years. And notice something about the relationship itself, because the episode is careful with it in a way Family Guy usually is not. Luke is not written as a predator. He is written as a young man who did something stupid and got caught, and who likes the girl who writes to him. When he escapes, he does not escape to hurt anybody. He escapes because he cannot stand being away from her any longer, which is, in its own broken way, the first time in the entire series that somebody has wanted Meg badly enough to do something insane about it. That is the tragedy the episode is built on. The healthiest romantic relationship Meg Griffin has ever had was conducted through the mail, with a convicted felon on a school assignment, and it ended with both of them in custody. Brian sees all of this and tells her parents. The family reaction is exactly what anybody would expect. Peter and Lois forbid it. Meg tries to explain, tries to argue that Luke had reasons, tries to make them understand, and gets nowhere. Then Luke breaks out of the prison and turns up at the Griffin house, and he hides in Meg's closet, and Brian finds him and calls Joe. Luke is arrested. And Meg is arrested with him, as an accessory, for hiding a fugitive. Then comes the detail that matters most in the entire episode, and the show does not underline it at all. Nobody defends her. Nobody fights it. Nobody hires anybody. Meg Griffin, a teenager with no criminal history, goes to prison, and the implication the episode leaves behind is that in the whole time she is in there, her family does not visit. Weeks pass, and then she comes home. The Meg who walks back into that house is not the girl who left it. She has a new posture. She has a new voice. She drinks openly. She has learned things in there, and she has decided that the arrangement she used to live under is finished, and she goes straight at Peter. The beating she gives her father in that episode is one of the most brutal pieces of animation Family Guy has ever produced, and the show deliberately staged the worst part of it as a direct visual reference to a famous scene from the film American History X, which is not a movie anybody parodies casually. She does not shout at him. She does not argue with him. She simply removes any question about who is now the strongest person in that house. Lois tries to make peace. She does laundry for Meg, which is the only language Lois really speaks. Meg's answer to the peace offering is to explain what she has been using her mother's clothes for and what she has been using as a toilet. The house goes quiet. What the Griffins do next is the important part. They are polite to her. They are careful. They are respectful. They pick their words. They do not talk over her. Nobody tells her to shut up. For the first and effectively only time in the history of this program, Meg Griffin walks into a room and the room adjusts around her. In that moment, the show quietly answers the question this whole video has been circling, which is why the Griffins treat Meg the way they do. They treat her that way because she has never made them stop, and the instant she makes them stop, they stop immediately and completely and without needing to be told twice. Her looks have nothing to do with it. Neither does her voice, or her hat, or her personality. The abuse ran on one thing only, which is that it was free. That is a bleak thing for a comedy to admit about its own characters, and the show admits it without a single line of dialogue. It is all in the staging. Watch the Griffins in those scenes. Peter shrinks. Lois manages. Chris keeps his head down. They behave, all of them, exactly like people who always knew what they were doing was optional and had simply never had a reason to stop. There is also a second, quieter horror in that stretch of the episode, and it is about the audience rather than the family. Those scenes are funny. They are meant to be funny, and they are funny. A frightened Peter Griffin creeping around his own kitchen is good comedy, and the reason it works is that the audience has been trained for a decade to enjoy Meg being at the bottom, so watching the arrangement flip is a genuine surprise. The show got a real laugh out of an idea it had spent 10 years making impossible to imagine. Now, the last act. Because the last act is where this becomes a story about her character rather than about theirs. Meg has decided to leave Quahog. Properly this time, for good. And to leave, she needs money, and she has no money, so she settles on a plan. She ambushes Brian in his car, forces him at gunpoint to drive her to Mort Goldman's pharmacy, and prepares to rob it. This is the furthest Meg Griffin has ever traveled from herself. She is armed. She has a hostage. She is minutes away from committing a felony that will define the rest of her life, and she is doing it because it is the only route she can see to a door. Brian tries the obvious thing first. He tells her this is not who she is. And she gives him the answer that is the real center of the whole episode. Nobody cares about her. It is her position. That is the conclusion she has reached after 16 or 17 years of evidence, and it is not an unreasonable conclusion given the evidence. So Brian gives up on arguing and hands her the article, the piece he wrote about her, the profile, thousands of words about who Meg Griffin actually is, written by somebody who spent weeks watching her closely and paying attention. She reads it, and she stops. The episode ends there. She puts it down, she stops the robbery, she goes home, and by the next episode, everything is exactly as it was. The fear is gone. The respect is gone. The gag comes back. Peter tells her to shut up, and the world resets. What she gave up in that pharmacy is the whole point. She had it. She had the one thing she has wanted since 1999, which is for the people in that house to treat her like she matters, and she had it locked down completely, and the price of keeping it was simply continuing to be frightening. She could have held that position for the rest of her life. Nobody in Quahog was going to take it off her. She handed it back for a magazine article. The article promised her nothing and fixed nothing. It proved that one person, once, had looked at her carefully and found something worth writing down, and that was enough to make her put the gun away and go back to being the girl at the end of the table. That is the case for Meg Griffin, complete in one scene. Her decency is not a limitation. This episode is the show going out of its way to prove that Meg Griffin is entirely capable of being the most dangerous person in this town. She has the capacity for violence. She has the capacity for crime. She was effective at both, immediately, with no training and no practice. Everything she needs to take what she wants from these people is sitting right there inside her, and she has demonstrated it on screen. She does not use it. That is a choice she makes, every day, for 25 years. And this is the episode that proves it is a choice. Everybody else in this show runs the other way. Peter uses whatever power he has, instantly and thoughtlessly, every time. Stewie has been trying to acquire power since he was born, specifically so that he can use it. Lois takes what she wants when the opportunity presents itself. Brian will lie to gain an advantage, in an argument about books. Not one of these characters has ever had power and left it on the table. Meg had absolute power over her entire family for the length of one episode and gave it back in exchange for being seen once. How she used that power while she had it is easy to miss inside all the shouting. Meg does not kill anybody. She does not burn the house down. She does not go after Connie D'Amico, who has spent years making her life miserable and who would have been the obvious first stop for anybody looking to settle scores. She does not go after Neil. She does not go after the school. She does not go looking for the boy who shot his own brother rather than take her to a dance. She goes after the people in the house, and only the people in the house, and only the ones who actually did it. Even at her absolute worst, with no restraints left and nothing to lose, Meg Griffin's violence is precisely targeted at the guilty. That is somebody with a very clear idea of who owes her what, holding it back for years, and then spending it exactly where it belongs. And then, having spent it, she apologizes with her actions by simply going back to how things were and never mentioning it again. There is no follow-up. The next time the family turns up, nobody brings it up. The show does not give her a single scene where she gets to say that she was right. The episode was mostly well-received, and it drew the usual complaints from the Parents Television Council, the watchdog group that had been attacking Family Guy since 1999. Most fans remember it as one of the darkest and funniest things the show ever made. Almost nobody remembers it as the episode where the series accidentally explained its own longest-running joke. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Dial Meg for Murder showed what happens when Meg fights back with her fists. It took another year and a half for the show to ask, what happens when she fights back with the truth? The answer came during a hurricane, in an episode with a strange title, and it ends with the most disturbing decision any character has made on this show. Section 9. Seahorse Seashell Party. A storm knocked the power out in Quahog on a Sunday night in the autumn of 2011, and the most important thing that ever happened to Meg Griffin happened because a television stopped working. 4 people were shut in a house together with nothing to do, and they did what that family always does with a spare minute. What followed is the longest speech this character has ever been given. The only time anybody in that house admitted out loud what they had been doing to her, and an ending critics have been arguing about ever since. This is the story of the episode where Family Guy explained itself to itself and then changed nothing. On October 2, 2011, Family Guy aired the second episode of its 10th season. It was called Seahorse Seashell Party. It was written by Wellesley Wild and directed by Brian Iles, and it was the 167th episode the show had produced. It was also part of a stunt. Fox had built a crossover event that night called the Night of the Hurricane, in which a single storm moved through all 3 of Seth MacFarlane's animated shows in sequence. The hurricane hit Stoolbend on The Cleveland Show, then it hit Quahog, and then it moved on to Langley Falls on American Dad. So the setup for the most important episode in Meg Griffin's entire history is a piece of network scheduling. A storm was passing through, and Family Guy needed a story that kept the family in one room. The premise is simple to the point of being nothing. The power goes out. The television stops working. The Griffins are stuck inside their house with each other and no distractions, and they are bored. Brian, separately, decides to pass the time by eating psychedelic mushrooms, which sends him into a nightmare that occupies half the episode and takes him completely out of the story. So that is 4 people, 1 room, no television, and nothing to do. And they start on Meg, because that is what this family does with a spare minute. None of it is one big cruel act. It is the ordinary grinding version. Small jokes, exclusions, little digs while they wait out the weather. It is the exact background level of contempt the audience has been trained not to notice for 12 years. And Meg snaps. What follows is the longest continuous piece of dialogue this character has ever been given. And the most important thing about it, the thing that gets lost in every discussion of this episode, is that every single word of it is true. She starts with Chris, and she starts with him because he opens his mouth first. He tells her he does not know what her problem is, and Meg says that this, right here, is the perfect example. He is her brother, he is supposed to be on her side, and instead, he treats her like he hates her, and he says hurtful things to her constantly, and she asks him whether he has any idea what that actually feels like. Everything in that sentence is verifiable. Chris locked her out of a party in her own house. Chris used her presumed death to make himself popular at school. She is not exaggerating, and Chris does not deny any of it, because he cannot. Then she turns to her mother, and the attack on Lois is the one that does real damage. Meg goes after the thing Lois has done for 20 years, which is to constantly and casually point out her daughter's shortcomings while presenting herself as the reasonable parent in the house. And then Meg says the sentence that ends the argument. When she turns 18, she does not know whether she wants to be around any of them ever again. Lois has nothing. She does not defend herself. She does not counter. She admits, out loud, on Fox, in prime time, that she has been a terrible mother to Meg. It is an extraordinary moment in a show like this, and it lasts about 4 seconds. Then Peter tries to lighten the mood, and Meg turns on him, and this is the part people remember. She tells him he has no education. She tells him he has no interests. She tells him he does whatever reckless thing he wants, whenever he wants, with no regard for anybody else. She tells him that when he is not terrorizing the town with his impulsive schemes, he is being a total jerk to his own family. She calls him completely selfish and totally irresponsible as a father. She calls him a waste of a man. Every one of those holds up against more than 25 years of episodes. He has no education. Correct. He has no interests beyond television and beer. Correct. He does whatever he wants regardless of consequences. It is the entire operating principle of the character. He terrorizes the community. He has started wars with his neighbors. He is a jerk to his family. The record on all of it runs the length of this video. Meg Griffin's monologue is an accurate summary delivered by somebody with nothing left to lose. And Peter's response to hearing an accurate summary of himself is the funniest and most revealing line in the episode. He decides she must be in love with her old man. That line establishes something bigger than stupidity. This man does not have the equipment to receive criticism at all. It goes into him and comes out the other side as flattery. There is no route by which any true thing about Peter Griffin can reach Peter Griffin. Then the episode does the thing that makes it worth all of this attention. Peter turns to Lois and demands that she make Meg stop, and Lois refuses. She refuses because Peter did not stand up for her a minute earlier, and now she is angry at him about it. And then the whole thing goes up. Lois goes at Peter. Peter goes at Lois. Chris gets involved. Within about 60 seconds of Meg removing herself from the role of designated target, 4 people who have lived together for over a decade are tearing each other to pieces. Peter ends up running upstairs in tears. Lois goes after him. Chris walks out, and Meg is left sitting alone in the living room, having won completely, looking at the wreckage. This is the experiment. Nobody designed it, but that is what it is. The show took one person out of the system for 10 minutes and watched what the system did without her. And the answer was that it collapsed almost instantly, because there was nothing holding it together except a shared agreement about who was at fault for everything. Notice how fast it goes, because the speed is the finding. The Griffins needed no long night of hard conversations. It took less than a minute. The moment the usual target stepped out of the way, Peter and Lois found each other, and the years of things they had been quietly not saying came out in a rush, because those things had been in the room the whole time. Meg was simply where the dysfunction went. Brian comes down from his nightmare and finds her there. He tells her she did the right thing. He tells her he liked watching her stand up for herself. And Meg says the line the entire episode exists for. She asks him whether he thinks it is possible that this family cannot survive without some kind of lightning rod to absorb all the dysfunction. She says it is not ideal. She says maybe it is just her lot in life to provide it. And then she says the sentence that should be carved over the front door of that house. Maybe if she feels bad, they do not have to. Brian's answer is the only unqualified compliment Meg Griffin receives in the entire run of this program. He tells her that is a noble and mature way to look at it, and that she might be the strongest person in that house. Then she goes and apologizes. That is the ending. She finds her family, and she tells them that none of them did anything wrong, and that she took her own problems out on them, and that it was not fair of her, and that from now on, they should be taking their problems out on her instead. She rebuilds every ego she flattened. She hands Peter back his self-image. She hands Lois back the idea that she is a good mother. She takes the entire fight, which she did not start, and which she was right about, and she puts it in her own pocket and carries it out of the room. Peter's response is to observe, with satisfaction, that the whole thing turned out to be about her rather than about them. Everybody hugs. And then the family walks outside into bright, clear sunshine, congratulating themselves on the beautiful day after the storm. And Brian points out that the storm is not over. They are standing in the eye of the hurricane. The second half is still coming. That is the writers saying, in the last 10 seconds, exactly what they think happens next. There is one more beat before that, and it undercuts everything around it. Stewie turns to the camera and describes the whole episode as a parable about drug use, meaning Brian's mushrooms, meaning the half of the episode that had nothing to do with anything. It is a joke about how disconnected the two stories were. It is the show pointing at its own seams and laughing. The placement of that matters. Family Guy has just produced the single most serious piece of character writing in its entire history, and its final instinct is to lean into the camera and make a gag about how the episode did not really work. Whether that is nerves or habit or a genuine refusal to be caught taking anything seriously, the effect is the same. The show could not let the moment stand for even 5 seconds without stepping on it, and Stewie is not the only one absent from what happened. Brian, the character the series treats as its moral center, spent the entire fight hiding in a crib having visions, which means the one person in that house who might have backed Meg up while it counted was chemically unavailable. He arrives afterward, hears the summary, and hands out the compliment. That is the closest thing to an ally Meg Griffin has ever had, and he showed up after the fighting stopped. The critics hated this episode, and they hated the ending specifically. The complaint, which came from every direction, was that Family Guy had spent years using this character as a punching bag, then produced one episode that appeared to be about how wrong that was, and then closed it by having the victim volunteer for another decade of it. Kevin McFarland at the AV Club wrote that the show had gone down the path of least resistance for years, joining in with the fans who disliked her instead of doing the work to make her matter, and that a single episode of forced justification did not change any of that. He is right about the show. He is wrong about Meg, because look at what she actually does in that final scene, and look at it without the sentiment. Meg is not deluded. She is not brainwashed. She is not a girl who thinks she deserves it. She ran the test herself, live, in front of her, 5 minutes earlier. She said the true thing, and she watched 4 people fall apart on contact with it, and she reached a conclusion based on the evidence in front of her. The conclusion was that these people cannot hold themselves together, that somebody has to carry the weight of what is wrong with them, and that if she puts it down, they will simply pick it up and hit each other with it instead. And then she decided that she would rather it landed on her than on them. That is the single most generous act any character has ever performed in this show, and it is played as a joke, and the audience laughed, and the critics called it a betrayal. Both things are true at once. The episode is a failure of writing and a triumph of character. Family Guy did not intend to create a moral hero. It intended to acknowledge a running gag and get out clean. What it accidentally produced was a scene in which a 17-year-old girl looks directly at her own suffering, understands exactly what it is for, and chooses to keep doing it, because the alternative is worse for people who have never once been good to her. There is a version of that decision that is deeply sad, and there is a version that is close to holy, and the honest answer is that it is both. It is what people do inside families that do not work. Somebody always ends up carrying it. Usually, it is whoever is least able to fight back. And usually, nobody ever thanks them. And usually, the family believes the problem is that person. Family Guy put that on television in 2011, on purpose, in one scene, and then never went back to it again. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So that leaves one question standing, and it is the one this whole video has been building toward. Meg suffers, and that has never been in doubt. The question is whether the case holds up when it is run against everybody, including her. There is evidence on the other side. and it deserves to be heard before the verdict. Section 10. The only good person in Quahog. There is a test for whether somebody is a good person, and most people use a different one. Kindness when things are going well does not settle it. Neither does being clever or popular or successful or funny. Anybody at all can have every one of those without being good. The test is what a person does when they have power over somebody else and no consequences for using it. That is the only test that means anything because it is the only one that cannot be faked. Anybody can behave when they are being watched. The question is, what happens when nobody is watching, nobody will hand out any punishment, and the person standing there cannot fight back? Run that test against every character in Family Guy and watch what happens. Peter Griffin has power over his daughter and zero consequences for using it. He uses it constantly. He has traded her, roped her, injured her, mocked her, altered her legal name for a joke, and told a room full of strangers that she is alive by accident. He fails the test more comprehensively than any character in the series. Lois Griffin has power over her daughter and zero consequences. She uses it more quietly, which is worse. She has competed with her, undercut her, ignored her, and on one occasion handed her something dark and left the room because comforting her had taken 45 minutes. She fails. Chris Griffin has almost no power in that house, but he has exactly one advantage over exactly one person, and he spends it. He fails, and he fails knowingly, which is the worst version. Stewie Griffin has enormous power and uses it on everyone, which somehow makes him the most consistent person in the cast. He fails the test, but he has never fabricated a special exception for Meg, and he has saved her, carried her, and preferred her company more than once. He fails, with credit. Brian Griffin has the moral vocabulary, the education, the self-image, and the platform. He fails hardest of all, because he is the only one who can explain in detail exactly why what he is doing is wrong, and does it anyway, and then writes an article about it. Glenn Quagmire fails. Connie D'Amico fails. Neil Goldman, the boy everyone treats as harmless, held a contract over a girl who signed it out of loneliness and put her to work in his front yard. He fails too. Cleveland Brown passes. Joe Swanson passes. Two men, neither related to her, both of them minor characters who appear in a handful of her stories, and both of them manage the basic decency her own parents could not. Now run it on Meg. Meg Griffin has had power over her family exactly once, in one episode, and it was total. She had them frightened. She had them respectful. She had, for the first and only time in more than 25 years, the ability to do to them everything they had done to her, with no consequences and no opposition. She handed it back for a magazine article. She has had power over Neil Goldman for years, a boy who would have done anything she asked, and she has never once used him. She has had leverage on Brian, whose secrets are considerable, and who lives in her house. She has never used it. She has had 100 chances to sell Chris out for a seat at a better table, and she has taken none of them. She saved Stewie's life when she could simply have not noticed. She passes. She is the only one who passes under real pressure, and she passes repeatedly, over hundreds of episodes, with the opportunities documented on screen. And there is a second ledger worth putting next to that one, because the first ledger only covers what she has not done. This one covers what she has taken. She has been told to be quiet by her father more times than anybody has counted. She has been publicly described by him as an accident. She has had her legal name altered as a punchline. She has been sold to settle a pharmacy bill. She has been put in a coma retrieving beer from a flooded room. She has been roped and dragged out of her own bedroom for rodeo practice. She has been handed something dangerous by her own mother instead of a conversation. She has watched that mother kiss the only decent boyfriend she ever had. She has been locked out of a party in her own house by her own brother. She has been left in a prison cell without a visit. She has been replaced on her own family's television show by somebody prettier, and the ratings went up. That is a list of things that happened to a character, in canon, on a major network, over more than 25 years, to a young woman who has responded to all of it by continuing to come downstairs for dinner. Now, the case against her, because a verdict that ignores the evidence, is not worth anything. The first count is the makeover. In Don't Make Me Over, she gets beautiful and popular and becomes insufferable, and looks down on the friends who stood by her. That happened. The defense is not that it did not happen. The defense is that it lasted one episode, that she corrected it herself, and that it is the single blemish on a record spanning more than 25 years. Set that against Peter's behavior during any given week, and the comparison is not close. The second count is barely legal, and it is the serious one. After the prom, Meg becomes obsessed with Brian, and the episode escalates until she is holding him against his will. That is the worst thing on her record, and it should not be played down. It is also, plainly, a product of the show's escalation logic rather than a considered piece of character work. In exactly the same way the nail gun gag and the burning saleswoman are. And the cause is right there in the episode. She was handed 1 hour of being wanted by somebody who had to get drunk to be there, and then it was taken away, and she had no idea what to do with any of it because nobody had ever taught her. The third count is dial Meg for murder. She came home violent. She hurt her father badly. She took a hostage at gunpoint, all true, and she aimed it exclusively at the people who had actually done it, never touched Connie or the school or anybody outside the house, and stopped the moment somebody showed her 1 page of evidence that she was seen. The fourth count is the modern show. In the last several seasons, Meg has become snarky, unpredictable, and occasionally alarming. She tells Lois off. She has taken the head off Ernie the giant chicken. She is not the girl in the pink hat at the end of the table anymore. And that count is the most interesting one, because of when it happened. The abuse started fading around the 14th season. By the 20th, it was essentially gone. Modern Family Guy lets Meg talk, lets her finish, and puts her in stories that treat her as a functioning member of the household. And in exactly that same stretch of the show, she stopped being a martyr and started being a person with an edge. That is the thesis proving itself. The lightning rod was a job rather than a personality. The moment the family stopped needing somebody to absorb everything, the person doing the absorbing put it down and became something else. She was employed the whole time. The show has never said any of this out loud, which is fitting because the show has never really known what to do with her at any point in its history. In November of 2016, the showrunner Alex Sulkin was asked whether the writers were going to develop Chris and Meg further, and he said they were working on it. He mentioned an idea for an episode in which Meg comes out, built on the moments across the years where the series had pointed in that direction. He also said it was not finalized. It never happened. That is Meg Griffin's entire history in one exchange. A plan, expressed sincerely, that did not get made. The strangest part of all of this is the audience. The audience worked it out a long time ago. In May of 2009, right in the middle of the cruelest stretch of the show, IGN published a ranking of the 25 best Family Guy characters, and Meg came in at number 11. That is during the years when the writers had decided she was worthless, when the family was at its most vicious, when the joke was at full volume. The fans put her in the top half anyway, ahead of most of the cast, while the show was still telling them she was the problem. And Mila Kunis has been doing that voice since she was 15 years old. She is in her 40s now. She has spent more of her life being Meg Griffin than not being her, and she has never once publicly complained about the character, and she has described the humiliation as fun, and she has kept turning up to record it for a quarter of a century. So this is where all of this lands. Family Guy is a show about a family of people who cannot absorb the smallest insult without exploding. That is the engine of the show, rather than a criticism of it. Peter cannot be told no. Stewie cannot be denied. Brian cannot be embarrassed. Lois cannot be unappreciated. Every plot in more than 25 years starts with one of them being unable to let something go, and every plot ends with somebody else paying for it. And in the middle of that, sitting at the end of a table nobody looks at, in a pink hat that was designed to make her forgettable, is a girl who has been insulted publicly and repeatedly by her own father for a quarter of a century and has never once made him pay for it. She has been given exits and turned them down. She has been given power and given it back. She has been given a lie that would have bought her friends, and she returned it because keeping it would have hurt somebody. She has been given real talents and no adult who noticed. She has been given one honest compliment in more than 25 years, from a dog who was coming down off a bad trip, and she has never asked for a second one. The writers did not build that on purpose, and that is the strangest part of the whole record. Nobody in that room set out to create the most morally consistent character in adult animation. They set out to solve a staffing problem with a running gag, and they solved it, thousands of times, at 1 second per use. And underneath 15 years of that, entirely by accident, the constant pressure produced something the show has never been able to write on purpose, which is a good person. Nice is easy, and this is not that. She is good, because she has been handed every reason and every opportunity to become exactly like the people around her, and has declined, over and over, in public, at cost, with nothing waiting for her on the other side. The last shot of Seahorse Seashell Party is the whole family standing in the sunshine, congratulating each other on the beautiful weather, while a dog quietly points out that they are standing in the eye of a hurricane and the storm is coming back. That is Meg's life, and she knows it. She knows the calm is temporary. She knows the second half is coming. She knows that by next Sunday, somebody will tell her to shut up and everyone will laugh and nothing she said will have mattered. And she goes back inside with them anyway. On January 31st, 1999, 22 million people sat down after the Super Bowl and watched the first episode of Family Guy. And in the corner of that kitchen, there was a teenage girl that nobody in the building had figured out how to write. More than 25 years, over 400 episodes, one banned episode, several lawsuits, and a national scandal or two later, she is still standing in that kitchen. Everyone in that house is louder than her. Everyone in that town is more popular. Everyone watching has laughed at her. And she is still, by a distance that is not even close, the best person in the room. More than 25 years of television, and the show never once said it plainly. It got as close as it has ever come on a night in October of 2011, from a dog who had spent the whole episode somewhere else, and it has not been back since. So somebody else has to say it, and it might as well be tonight. Meg Griffin was never the joke. She was the only one in Quahog who ever understood what the joke was costing, and she paid it anyway, quietly, for everybody, for more than 25 years, and nobody in that house has thanked her once. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.